FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network, and I'm Kerry Lutz. Today is August 28th, 2019. Well, you know, retirement, it's elusive for many of you out there. Some of you have written me and told me you're never going to be able to retire. I say, hey, that's a good thing, as long as you're doing something that you want to do, that's fulfilling, that really makes you feel like your life has meaning, or at least that you have value and that you're doing this voluntarily. But if you're not, and you're a greeter at Walmart or one of those people that looks at the receipts when you leave Costco, then you got to start thinking of things differently. Person you're about to hear from took a rather circuitous route to becoming a financial retirement expert. Her name is Arwen Becker, and you can find her at Becker, Becker, retirement. So you got 2 R's there, .com. And Becker, you started out life as a zoologist, and now you're an expert in financial human spirits. So it's great to have you on. You know, you talk about transitions, and you talk about people, you know, Steve Jobs gave that Stanford commencement address, connecting the dots, how nothing in his life as he was living it made any sense. But then when he looked back, somehow it all fit into place. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. There's zero question about it. Yeah, you said started out with a zoology degree, and now I own a retirement planning firm. But it's really just those little pieces in life. I mean, I found myself divorced at 24 and not knowing how to pay my own bills, not knowing how to save, and it's just interesting how life has a way of one woman in a coffee shop meeting another gentleman, and he ended up hiring me, and that man has been my business partner for 20 years, my husband for the last 15. So we're retirement planners together.
Huh. Interesting. So obviously you're an expert in this. You've been doing it for nearly 20 years. And what do you think is the state of today's future retirees?
Well, it's not as bad as everybody thinks it is, but it's certainly a lot more challenging than it was 20 years ago. Especially living in the Seattle area, cost of living has just skyrocketed in the last 10 to 15 years. And so things just change. I mean, we went through this 2000 to 2009, and a lot of the savings that people had in their 50s that they expected now to be, you know, near their 70s, it kind of got obliterated during those 10 worst years in stock market history. And so it's just the planning's changed. And I think it's taken some retirees a little bit longer to adapt to it, or to recognize that we've got to make some changes. And unfortunately, that's put a lot of people in a further state of debt than they maybe expected to be when they were in their 50s and 60s. So it's definitely a different beast, I would say, but there's a lot of great planning that can help people along the way.
Okay, so you say things have changed. In what way have they changed?
Well, people don't have the amount of assets that they did when they were retiring or looking at retirement in the late 90s. And the cost of downsizing doesn't really happen where we are anymore. So people used to be able to sell their home. They had all that equity in it. They'd be able to get a house in a similar neighborhood, stay near the grandkids, and then still have, you know, a couple $100,000 to be able to put into their retirement. And that's just not the case now. People either have to move out of the neighborhood, completely out of the area, to be able to get a less expensive house, or they're just resizing. They're paying the exact same cost for a smaller home in the area. And so that's forcing people to make some difficult choices, to either move away from their grandkids, or, you know, get a roommate, or, you know, possibly look at other options that they maybe weren't so excited about, like a reverse mortgage, to be able to stay in the neighborhood that their grandkids are in and that their friends and family are in. So it's just different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly is. So one thing that people do is they move to less expensive states without income taxes. Now, obviously, where you are in Washington State, there is no income tax, but it is, especially the Seattle metro area, extremely costly. It's getting there like San Francisco or New York. So it's of necessity, but people have been moving to cheaper locales since I was a kid. I mean, I remember my grandparents moving to Florida, and that was before there was even an income tax in the state of New Jersey. So it's kind of human nature to do that, isn't it, for your retirement?
I think it is for a lot of people, but it's somewhat of a rude awakening if you recognize you're having to move away from your grandkids, because there's a lot, especially a lot of women who find themselves widowed. The average age of a woman is widowed is 59. And so all of a sudden finding themselves moving to a state without their spouse or just really outside the area and moving away from their kids is just almost something that they can't even contemplate doing. And so it puts this added stress on families to be able to figure out, well, I know that financially I need to move, but I don't want to. And so they're facing really tough choices, moving away from family and where their heart is, where their grandkids are.
Well, what about just packing up the bags and showing up on your kid's doorstep? That would cut everybody's costs, wouldn't it?
Well, I certainly know that is one of the biggest fears of women, is that they don't want to be a burden on their kids, which is so funny because women tend to be, in comparison to their brothers, they're the ones that take care of ailing parents most of the time. The women spend a lot of years outside of the workforce. They either care for kids or they're caring for their parents, or worse yet, they're in this sandwich generation where they're doing it simultaneously, which means they don't have as much going into Social Security. They don't have as much going into their company plans, 401k, 403b at work because they're out of the workforce. And so it's just like this double whammy. They don't have the savings. They're caring for people, but they don't want to be that burden because they know what it's like to have to carry the burden themselves. And so it's just it's really strange dichotomy, especially for women. They find themselves not wanting to do the exact same thing that they have already done for their parents, which is being cared for.
Well, going back to the old-fashioned notion of the family, it was very often, I remember my grandmother lived with us, and it was partly financial and partly she was getting a little too old to maintain the house. She wound up moving to Florida and living on her own for many years after that. But it's kind of going back to something that we used to have where, especially with both parents working, having a grandparent in the house to keep an eye on the children, to help raise them, to do some housework perhaps, and just keep an eye on things. That isn't such a bad thing, is it?
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.
Financial Survival Network is brought to you today by Arwen Resources, a junior exploration company with the appetite of a major. It's hot on the trail of the next globally significant discovery, creating enormous potential upside for you, the shareholder. Arwen is one of the most aggressive exploration companies pursuing high-grade, scalable gold and copper deposits, and has a premier 7-project portfolio, including its 2 flagships, Committee Bay in the Arctic and Sombrero in Peru. Arwen's unparalleled technical team and highly experienced management has a history of success in advancing and monetizing exploration assets. No wonder Arwen's been called one of the best in the junior exploration sector. Arwen trades on the TSX and the NYSE under AUG. To learn more, go to arwenresources.com. That's AURYN resources.com.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
It's not. No, I totally agree. I think where things have continued to shift as we continue to live for longer. Life expectancy 1900 was 47. Then life expectancy when Social Security came online in 1935 was 62. Okay. And yet now people living well into their 80s, it means that the likelihood that a woman or a man is going to need some form of health care is very high because they're living well into our 80s. And so, having somebody move into the home is great for a time, but the chances are that mom or dad living there are going to eventually need some form of outside care. So again, it forces the 50 and 60-year-old who has their 80-year-old parent living with them who really can't be much of a help now necessarily with younger kids, but now it puts this added pressure. And it just didn't exist, decades ago to the degree that it does now, because longevity is such a big part of it's really the biggest risk that we face in retirement now, is outliving our money.
Mm-hmm.
And so that puts a lot of pressure on everybody.
Yes, certainly does. And things are different, that's for sure. And can really see what you're talking about there, that the planning has got to be a whole different area. So what do you do when somebody comes and visits you and is seeking your advice here?
Well, I mean, specifically, the biggest part of retirement planning is this income piece. How are you going to get income coming in month after month, year after year for the rest of your life? And then how are we going to face this longevity risk that we have of outliving our money? So really, comprehensive planning should be looking at that. What we find over and over is the biggest thing that we deal with when people come into our office is they have no idea how all of the stuff that they have functions together in a plan that says, this is how much money, all of my Social Security, maybe I have a little rental income or little part-time wages, or, then I've got maybe a pension if they're fortunate enough to still have that. That's certainly going the way of the dodo bird. But you have all these pieces in addition to the assets in my home. And how in the world does this actually function? And that's the biggest challenge, that people constantly are planning in this little microclimate where they talk to their investment advisor, and then they have their insurance agent who helps them out with insurance or long-term care, and then they've got the pension provider, and they've talked to Social Security, but they have no idea how it functions together. And so oftentimes people they don't know how to, if they do have debt, how to even pay it off, because they don't know how all the pieces function. And so really that is the biggest benefit to people getting a comprehensive financial plan, where you have an understanding how all of these pieces function together, so you can make optimal decisions on when to take your Social Security, and if you're fortunate enough to have a pension, when you take that, and if you're married, should you have some form of survivor benefits on that, and how that's going to all work together. And then you've got taxes for the future if you've been saving in an IRA or a 401k or a qualified plan. So it's looking at all these pieces together, and that absolutely is the biggest thing, Carrie, that I can say is that people often just have no idea how it functions. And so they kind of bury their head in the sand, and they say, I've got too much debt, or I'm never going to be able to retire, or I'm this, that, or the other thing. But they've never really sat down with somebody who's been able to show them clearly, this is how it works together. This is what your picture looks like. Most of the time it looks better than it actually is, than what they think it is, just because good planning, there's a lot of nuances that go along with it.
Sure.
And so that's the biggest thing I could say for people, is being able to have this understanding of how it all functions together is so vitally important.
Yeah, I can see your point there. So what do you think the biggest mistake is that people make in planning for their retirement?
I think the biggest is they delay even getting good planning advice. As I said, they bury their head in the sand, or they just go, it's going to be expensive to work with a planner, so therefore I'm just going to try and do it myself. I'd probably say those are the two biggest things. People are afraid to pay fees, which fees, it's important because you're on fixed income once you retire. So that's an important consideration, but they're afraid either that the picture is going to look too bad, so therefore they don't do anything, analysis paralysis, or just complete avoidance, or they're just afraid that, somebody's going to take advantage of them, or, just gouge them with fees, and so they figure they'll do it themselves. And both of those can be extremely problematic. And, a great planner is going to be absolutely worth the weight in gold because of the fact that's what we do. We help people sidestep issues that we see every single day over and over for, year after year. And we see these patterns that people tend to fall in. And so it helps you, the listener, to avoid that. And also to be able to have your eyes wide open and know, oh, okay, so yeah, this isn't as good or as bad as I thought it would be, but now I at least know where I stand, and then I can start making good, solid choices to be able to better my situation. I love doing that. That's like that aha moment that a lot of people get.
Yeah. Yeah, well, in this world, you need to spend money to make money, and I guess you just have to pick that person, because that is going to be a trusted advisor, and you have to really trust that person, and you really have to do your due diligence. Getting recommendations from people isn't necessarily the end point. It's the beginning point. You got to do your research and find out everything about that person and make sure that you're compatible with them so that you can work together.
Yeah, it's like a doctor. I mean, you don't just necessarily pick the first one. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. You've got to make sure that you have some rapport, because statistically, when women are, because 80% of women die, of married women die widowed. So 80% of men die married, 80% of women die widowed. And 70% of those women leave their financial advisor, if they have one, when that happens, because their advisor did not prepare them for the possibility of being widowed. Yeah. The very real possibility. And so trusting your gut, making sure that you can communicate. I mean, if you're married, that both of you can communicate. And especially, I hate to hammer it, but especially the wife, she needs to really have a good relationship where she feels like she can get quality communication and information in the way that she needs to hear it, because she's likely going to be the one left picking up the pieces. I would say kind of the last woman standing. Yeah. And so trusting your gut and making sure that feels right. And if it doesn't, interview somebody else and keep doing it. Because when I got divorced at 24, I had a lot of life to pick up the pieces, rework my life, figure out what I was going to do. But when you're 65, you don't have the timeline to make a really large mistake in retirement with the assets that you need for the rest of your life, and then to be able to have enough time to make that up. Yeah. And so getting it done right the first time is absolutely just so important.
Couldn't agree with you more. People don't think about it enough. You don't want to think about the future, but before you know it, the future is the present, and it happens so quickly you never had a chance to even prepare for it. Arwen, really appreciate you coming on. Just tell us where we find you, how we connect with you on the web.
Yeah, so our company, Becker Retirement Group, you can go to beckerretirement.com and see all the great information about our company and our family and all the good work that we do. And then, as I had mentioned to you when we were talking before we came on air, is that I'm also in the process of my book being edited. I've been kind of going back and forth on some titles, but I'm really looking forward to it, and there'll be information on our website about that as well. But that's specifically going to be written to women about 45 and above as it relates to retirement. So it's going to be a really, really great story.
Hey, well, appreciate you coming on. Any questions or comments? Email kl@carrielutz.com, Twitter feed @carrielutz, Facebook page Financial Survival Network. Hey, promise us, Arwen, that when your book is out, you will come on. I'll read it, promise, cover to cover, and we'll have a good talk about it.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.